Hey, how's it going, guys? Okay, so let's get right to it. Concepts or conceptual sort of thinking. Um, I don't know if it's unique to the schizoid. I doubt it is. Um, it most assuredly isn't. But maybe the schizoid tends to do a little bit more of it than um, the average person. The average schizoid enjoyer maybe does a little bit more. And today, specifically, I want to talk about seeing people as concepts, conceptualizing the human figure, the human object, the human whatever. Um, and I do this, and I've done this like most of my life, which is instead of just to get to the basics, it's instead of seeing people as you're kind of taught to, which is individual sentient beings that are like made of flesh and bone, have their own thoughts and experiences, so on and so forth, inside, their brain meats, and they, ride along these organic machines known as the human body, uh, and so on, and treating them as such. Hmm. Or even individual consciousness floating about you, even if you want to get into the metaphysical, but I've always had trouble doing that my entire life, and because I couldn't really do that for myself either. And so I started developing this way of seeing people, and that way is seeing them as concepts, almost like symbols, but symbols that's a little too concretized. Okay, so seeing them as a representation of a variety of potentials associated to whatever traits in their care, like whatever traits they're displaying in their behavior, and then seeing those potentials and seeing those possibilities and what possibilities had come before that based on the information provided, and it will be adjusted based on any new data that comes forward, either by a person willingly giving it to me, or the person just displaying these behaviors publicly or in some way. um so I start visualizing people as concepts, ideas, the same way you would look at a archetype or trope in fiction or in story. We see people that live specific types of lives have certain types of behaviors and pathology, and um, more than likely will continue their individual narratives in a specific way because they are that archetype of some sort. And it's difficult, but some individuals can separate themselves and become more than just the archetype, or shift from one to the other, and so on. But that's not the conversation I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about seeing them as concepts that are far more abstract, as a miasma of possibility and decision making, and how those decisions have affected both the past, present, and possible futures. I've always seen people like that, even if I didn't have the words for it when I was younger. Didn't have the know-how to kind of formulate a way of explaining that. But I guess I kind of do now a little more. And in my mind, it's not that I can't differentiate between, say, a fictional protagonist or antagonist or something. I can differentiate that they exist in one exists in a material plane, one does not. Well, at least not in the shape of like a human body with flesh and bone and such. One is alive and one is not alive in the traditional sense. But as concepts, they don't seem very different, because a fictional character is merely a projected representation of an idea of what a sentient being of some kind or another could or couldn't be, or would or wouldn't be, how they would react and construct their sense of self via the narrative as well as the environment or the world building you've established. A good writer will have a fictional character that is both separated as well as integral to the environment that they inhabit to varying degrees. And I see people like that, like the people walking down the street, like myself, like my loved ones, like everyone. Um, I see them as these ideas. Trying to find the words for it. It's very difficult. And it doesn't mean I don't see them as human, because that's part of the concept. Those pieces, those things that oftentimes people refer to as, you have to see everyone as an individual human being, individual sentient creature. That's true, but that's just one layer. That's just one part of it all. They also represent a variety of other things on different abstract planes. Your actions represent things. Your presentation, your aesthetic, your own personal aesthetic, how it makes itself expressed via those actions. Your existence within what could be partially deterministic and partially free will sort of existence, depending on your arguments there. All those things are symbolic or conceptual. And even those very things can represent other avenues of thought and experience. So a human being is, or any sentient being, doesn't have to necessarily be human, any self-aware creature, is infinitely complex in ways that they themselves are probably not aware. So to place emphasis on a specific aspect is confusing to me. So seeing them as that is also confusing. Seeing them as concepts with all these things being a possibility of meaning make more sense to me. And I'm not sure why so many people see this as dehumanizing or like removing agency. I'm not sure what people how they would perceive this. I see it as elevating, so transcendent to a degree, to view people as concepts, some of which those components are material and immaterial, tangible, intangible. And so because of it, it's difficult to live a life amongst people that don't do the same, are either incapable, one possibility, or capable but find such a notion disturbing or unsettling to their values, maybe. I'm not sure. I can't put myself in those shoes. It's been too long. But I think that human beings, if they're perceived in such a manner, can work out their own internal mechanisms far better than if they hold on to a specific concrete sense of what it is to be a human and how human beings should be experienced and perceived and what human cognition should look like and what are its limitations. I think that is it's far less generous than seeing them as a concept. That I think a lot of people would disagree. Perhaps it just has something to do with me, as I don't consider myself to be particularly special or some protagonist in a grand narrative. There are narratives, there are millions, billions of them, none of which are greater than the next, many of which are conjoined, connected, all of which are connected to some degree. So it's difficult for me to separate that. And I don't see the need to do so, except for the purposes of having a more concrete conversation about human race on a more pragmatic level, a more material level. So otherwise things can get a little confusing and strange. But I like things that get confusing and strange. It's what makes things worthwhile. Otherwise, much becomes bland. And everything feels like anhedonia. Which brings me to another point that maybe I'd like to discuss a little further another time, but I still think it's I still think it's important to bring up. The ability to connect to concepts is far greater than to concrete stuff. Abstract concepts seem to be easier to navigate for me on an emotional level, which is odd for a schizoid to say. But many of you probably feel similar. You see music, you hear music, you feel music, and story, written one, graphic novel, video game, doesn't matter. The symbolic representation of a variety of figures, and then abstract beyond that. You can feel those things often, even as a schizoid. You can connect to those things as abstractions. There might be answers to why. Definitely answers to why, but I'm not going to get into that, I don't think. But what I'm trying to say a little bit here, too, is that I find it easier and more realistic for me to connect to other human beings when I think of them in this abstract sort of way. Because if I try to concretize a specific aspect of another human too much, it becomes more difficult for me to connect to them. And it becomes more difficult for me to connect to anything when being forced into concretizing who I am, what I am. What's a bummer is people that might not be cluster A or whatever. I find it difficult to grasp what I'm trying to say, maybe not. Get lost in it sometimes. Or I might just sound insane. That's okay. I wish I had better words to describe what this experience is and how it is that I perceive the world, so that I can use it on a more practical landscape, so that I can bring forward whatever use this information would be to someone that lives far more in the concrete. And as I said before, that doesn't make it any better or worse. It just makes it different. I gain quite a bit from those that don't think like me. There's a lot of information I can gather. Information that is either more difficult for me to retrieve or entirely inaccessible. So yes, concepts. ideas, abstractions of what anything means. It brings me solace, brings me connection. It may seem like chaos, but it comes down to being able to lose yourself in it and then recapture moments, recapture specific layers so that you can examine them and then let go again, let go of them again. It's the only way I can think of describing what I'm trying to say. In any case, that is my experience as a schizoid, and I think it's the experience of many schizoids. And I think part of the reason why a lot of schizoids, and this is just my opinion, have trouble connecting to anything is because we oftentimes live in a world, an environment, a social framework, or otherwise, just a cognitive framework. It's kind of imposed upon us, in which thinking has to be concretized at specific points. Because to deviate from that causes problems that aren't practical to those who would wish the status quo of cognition to continue forward. Odd it would be to think that those very people are capable of doing those levels of abstraction and are merely using the lower layers to keep themselves in power. But that's just crazy talk. Or is it? I don't know. What do you think? Or is that just cluster A paranoia? Comorbid action? I don't know. In any case, if you like what I talk about, if you think this is important, if this is helpful to you, if the server associated to this channel is helpful to you, or has made you feel any better about your existence as a schizoid, if my posts on Reddit have made you feel better as far as the videos go, please think about supporting what I'm trying to do. The About Me as a Patreon. If you want to join the Discord, you can just search up Schizoid and you'll find the Zoid Void very easily. And then you just go through the little vetting system. It's just to avoid trolls and people that just want to do damage. And you can be in there, hang out with your fellow schizoids in a very individualistic capacity with all those things philosophically in mind. And it's building. Thanks, guys, for listening. I hope you got something out of this. I certainly always do.